I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order and declare that we have a quorum present of 6 members. Welcome to this meeting of the College Station Independent School Board of Trustees. We were elected at large to represent the interest of our community and our state in educating our students. Our mission for our students in this district is success each life, each day, each hour. We adhere to all pertinent laws, policies, and procedures in posting agendas and conducting our meetings. The detailed agenda information was made available to us at least 72 hours in advance, and we have all come to this meeting informed and prepared. We have just completed a workshop meeting where we heard reports and discussed much of the information needed to make decisions in either this meeting or in upcoming meetings. This is a meeting of the 7 trustees in a public setting rather than a public meeting. As such, public comment is included on the agenda at a specific time and requires us to listen rather than take action so as to abide by the Open Meetings Act. We are pleased that you have taken time this evening to join us. We are very proud of this school district, and we thank you for your interest in and support of our students. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, members of the board. We begin this board meeting, as we do all of our regularly scheduled board meetings, with our pledges of allegiance to the American flag, the Texas flag, and our moment of silence. And we're excited this month to have 3 kiddos from our extended school year program here who are going to lead us. We have a number of great programs that go on during the summer, and one of those programs is ESY, or extended school year. So we've got Mrs. Lindsay Fuentes, who's coming over here to introduce her students. Lindsay is, if you do action in item I-1, she's the new director for student services. So assuming that, Lindsay, introduce your students, please.
Good evening. Jack Barr, Tierney Mitchell, and Garrett Marchbanks, come on up.
My name is Garrett. Sixth grade at Cypress Grove.
Thank you, Garrett.
My name is Tierney. I'm going to fifth grade.
Awesome. Thank you, Tierney.
My name is Jack. I am in Cypress Grove.
Thank you, Jack. Okay, well, let's go ahead.
Fifth grade.
Thank
I
you.
am in Cypress Grove.
Awesome. All right, let's lead us. Are y'all ready, guys? Hand over heart. Okay, let's salute the flag.
Salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
Under the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to Texas, one state under God, one indivisible.
And now for a moment of silence. Thank you. Oh, yes, it's a picture, guys. Remember what picture?
You're good, Devin.
All right, here we go, guys. Right here. Right here. Thank y'all very much.
All right. Thank y'all. And Mr. Harris, we have no other recognitions.
While everyone's getting settled, I'll go ahead and recognize and direct your attention to some of the artwork on the back wall of the room there. It's provided by students from our extended school year program, and some of them may have just been here, particularly Jack, Garrett, and Maddox. I noted your work, so thank all you students. That takes us to item D, the consent agenda. which are items E2, E3, G, H3, H4, I2, J1, 2, 3, 4, and K1. Nope, not K1. Does anyone want to remove any of the consent agenda items?
I would move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second that.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as presented. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion carries 6-0. That takes us to item E1, board directions and reports. Does anyone have any reports or announcements?
It's been good summer months.
I actually do have a couple of things I want to talk about, and it actually ties into what we talked about at the very end of our workshop, and that's the community-based accountability and what success in a student looks like. And since the end of the school year, I've seen two stellar examples of that, and I want to share them with you all. The first one was at Texas Boys State, where it's basically a leadership or government camp put on by the American Legion in Austin. And a number of CSISD students were there. And there were over 1,000 soon-to-be seniors in high school who participated in this. And of all those top-notch people who have impeccable resumes, every single one of them, 2 students are selected to go to Boys Nation. And one of those was from College Station ISD, my son's friend Abed, who a lot of you know. And I can tell you, that is what success looks like. The skills he has and that this district has played a part in is really a positive thing. And the second one is very, very different, but equally as, and maybe more so, impressive. At the state 7-on-7 tournament, which I happened to sit through the entirety of all the 5A and 6A schools in the state of Texas, there were qualifying tournaments to get there, and then once you get there, you play literally the best of the best. You go through pool play, get into a winner's bracket, is what they called it, and then you play a series of games, and these are teams that you would all recognize if you watch state football playoffs, and one game after another. Well, at the end of all of that, the 2 teams that were left standing were College Station High School and A&M Consolidated, and they played each other in the final, and hats off to College Station High School. They won 20-19 on a failed extra point. But out of all those schools, the fact that CSISD had the last 2 teams, I can tell you I felt some pride in it being from this district. So I wanted you all to know about that and that had happened since the end of the school year. Again, a different measure of success, but success nonetheless. Any other reports? Okay, Dr. Ely.
Mr. Harris, just wanted to talk with the board about 3 upcoming events. Want to make sure are on your schedules. On Tuesday, Tuesday, July the 31st, we'll be having our board training with ESC Region 6, going on our Senate Bill 1566 training. That's going to be from 11 to 1:30. 11 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. on Tuesday the 31st. That will be in the Purchasing Center Conference Room. So a little bit different place for us to make sure everybody is aware of that. So we'll be there at that time. And then want to make sure Kickoff 2018 is on everybody's schedule. That's be coming up before we know it. August the 9th, Thursday, August the 9th, we'll be back at Central Baptist Church with all of our faculty and staff coming back on contract who will be with us to kick off the 2018-2019 school year. That will be at 8:30 on that day. And then barring a hurricane, we will be having first day of school this year. I say that because we didn't have it last year. The first day of school will be August the 20th on Monday, so we look forward to having all of our kids rejoin us. It's quite lonely around here in the summer without kids, and we can't wait to get them all back. And they'll be back here on August the 20th. So those are three notable upcoming events that board should be aware of. That's the end of my report.
Thank you. Okay, that takes us to F, hearing of citizens. Do we have any cards? Thank you. Okay, so this is on an agenda item. So we will wait until we reach that agenda item, which will be coming up quickly. Then we'll do the board presentation and then have,
We'll do Mrs. Perry will do a presentation, and then we'll go ahead and do the public comment, and then go through deliberation.
okay. So then that takes us to item H1, consider approval of board policy FNF local related to student drug testing. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, members of the board. As you recall, we've been discussing the possibility of doing random student drug testing in College Station ISD for the upcoming school year. Been talking about that since the March board meeting. This is something that has been spoken about with me and other members of the community as something that quite possibly could be of benefit for students, for the overall safety and well-being of students in College Station ISD. And including members of our own faculty and staff have brought this to our attention. We started the discussion, as we said, in March. We discussed it 3 months. Then we came back with some draft policy in the June board workshop that we discussed. We've got a little bit of updated draft policy as well. And I think we're at the time to put it to a vote to see what is the will of the board moving forward with this. We do believe that this is a great value for our kids and for our families. It's a way for kids to be able to have a credible reason to say no to the peer pressures of alcohol and drugs. It's a great way to communicate with parents about the possibility of kids being able to have access to those substances. And we believe that it's the right move forward for us for the safety of our kids. Not only us as a senior administration, but our faculty and staff. I would like to point out a number of people who've been instrumental in this work that we've done, notably Chrissy Hester, who's not here today, Greg McIntyre, our former Chief Administrative Officer, and Molly Perry, our current Chief Administrative Officer, have all done a great deal of work, not only talking with companies that we could possibly be working with, but other districts, and talking to our stakeholders, our coaches, our directors, our sponsors, our campus administrators, not only on whether or not we should do it and what should be in policy, but how we could actually implement this in a way that works for our schools and for our families in this school district. So we will have a brief presentation from Mrs. Perry, kind of where we are and talking about the recommendation that you have before you, including the policy that you see. And then we, as you made note of, we do have one card for public comment after that. So with that, I'd like to throw it to Molly Perry, Chief Administrative Officer, for your report.
Thank you, Dr. Ely. Mr. Harris, members of the board, as you all have been in conversation since March regarding the possibility of revision to policy FNF local with student drug testing, I know you had an opportunity to review a draft of that policy back in June. Since that time, I began working just to further revise and tweak a few things related to the policy to ensure that our implementation would go as smoothly as possible. And so I know that you all received this last week with a summary of some of those things, but like to just walk you through some of the things that are up for proposed revision just since that draft version last month. So first of all, in the policy, you'll note the blue line are additions. Anything black line was already existing in local policy and is not proposed for any changes related to other areas. So looking at the mandatory program, we are still considering grades 9 through 12 only, and those that participate in extracurriculars or are parking on school property. So the information In terms of purpose, has not changed at all. We've looked at a few minor adjustments, like make available rather than provide, as well as looking at an orientation process that perhaps does not necessarily include conducting meetings, which was the previous language, to provide, because we want to ensure that we have adequate flexibility in terms of orientation that works for all of our students who would be participating. Then looking at the actual components related to the process, we're not proposing any revisions in terms of using a certified lab and making sure that our folks are fully informed about which substances will be tested. That would be part of that consent process. And we are continuing to propose that the testing be conducted using urine samples that would be collected at the campus in the least intrusive way possible. So looking at our testing, previously we had proposed no less than 40 and no more than 90 per testing date, and we are going to work very diligently to try to have that testing date be for all of our high school campuses rather than a staggered date, so that would encompass all of those. No changes proposed there. Under confirmation of positive test results, this is where hopefully we're going to provide a little more clarity about that process for medical review, because as discussed previously, there are certainly times where students are prescribed certain medications that might flag a positive test. And so we want to be very clear that that is not something that they necessarily have to disclose in advance, but is something that we would have a process in place for should they be flagged for medical review. And so the changes proposed would include that the parent provide that prescription to the medical review officer, which is certified and contracted by the lab within 3 business days. And then the MRO, or the medical review officer, would verify that with the physician as well as the pharmacy. And if determined that the reason for the positive test was related to a valid prescribed prescription, then the student's result is reported as negative. So at no time would a student receive any consequences during that medical review process. Then looking at retesting, this was something I believe we had conversations about, but it wasn't necessarily clear in the policy. So we added the language that following the confirmation of a positive test, the student would be retested on the next 3 random test dates, so long as they want to continue participating in extracurriculars and or parking on school property. The reason that we're proposing 3 is because the timing of when that first positive test occurs could certainly impact when the student is tested the next time. And so we wouldn't necessarily want to say the remainder of the school year if the positive test was happening in April. So that's our proposal within retesting. We'll continue, of course, to provide resources to our parents about community access for drug and alcohol abuse prevention. And in the consequences section, I've had an opportunity to visit with our key stakeholders at each of the high schools, and we are proposing some minor revisions there. After that first offense in a school year, because these results are cumulative during one academic year, they would reset the following academic year. We are continuing to propose the 15 calendar days, but we are looking at increasing clarity here under the period of suspension, that the student may participate in practices in accordance with administrative regulations. So the intent is that the student would continue to practice. However, they would not dress out, they would not travel with the team, they would not perform or compete. And so we will be developing administrative guidelines to work in conjunction with the policy to provide greater clarity about the individual's responsibilities at the campus, as well as some of these level of details. Under the second offense, you'll notice the 30 calendar days has remained as the period of time that the student is not participating or parking, and the same language related to their participation in accordance with administrative regulations. Then finally, in consideration of the offense section, if a student were to receive a third positive confirmed test during the same school year, we are proposing that they be suspended from that activity for one full calendar year. So that certainly would go into the next academic year. And there was some question surrounding their ability to participate if it was a co-curricular activity where they were actually enrolled in the course and they were receiving credit. And ultimately, we are proposing that that should be an individual consideration in terms of any schedule changes because circumstances do vary greatly, and that would provide the flexibility to consider those types of circumstances. Additionally, we, upon further consideration, felt that automatically suspending parking privileges for a full calendar year could potentially create a hardship on many families, and would like to have some administrative oversight in terms of what exactly the length of that suspension would be for parking. Appeals has not had any changes since the version viewed in June. That would continue to be under F&G local, but we did move the voluntary drug testing section to the end of the document rather than embedding it for clarity that there would not be consequences associated with students who did test positive when their parents chose to enroll them in this program if they were not required due to an extracurricular or parking. So those are highlights of the changes since the June meeting, where you all had an opportunity to walk through the policy that was drafted at that time. As I mentioned, we obviously have a lot of work on our end should you all move to adopt the policy this evening with both administrative guidelines as well as development of the orientation materials and the consent. In consideration of the timing, in that it is mid-June, or I'm sorry, July, and see, I feel better now, Dr. Wesson. We would propose that implementation of this policy actually take effect on October 1, which would coincide with the second 6 weeks of this academic year. That would ensure that we have adequate time to communicate widely and effectively with our families, as well as develop good administrative regulations and be prepared to implement. As you all are, I'm sure, well aware, many of those extracurricular activities are starting very, very soon. And so we want to ensure that this process goes as smoothly as possible and ultimately has the intended effect of deterring use and improving the health and safety of our students. Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we'll read well, I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit instead of reading that whole thing. We have one speaker, Robert Rose. You can go ahead and come up, and as you're doing that, I'm going to give a few of the guidelines. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, and the board assistant, executive assistant over there will be keeping the time for us. And please be respectful with your comments. And we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Mr. Rose.
I'm known for being respectful, so I think we'll be okay on that. Members of the board, my name is Robert Rose. I've been a resident of the area for about 46 years, and I have businesses and property here in College Station. And I'm also, in a former life, research assistant in a drug research lab at Texas A&M, working with the faculty of neuroscience at Texas A&M in drug research and research involved in drug policy and drug treatment. And so combining psychology and drug research, this issue is kind of right up my alley, so to speak. I tend to be involved in local issues regarding public policy, especially as that policy affects children in our area. I'd like to draw your attention to a few different matters. The effectiveness of drug testing has not been conclusively determined by quite a bit of the research out there. In fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics opposes widespread drug testing in schools because of a lack of evidence of the effectiveness of that drug testing. The National Institutes on Drug Abuse says that because of conflicting findings on drug testing, more research is needed, and that drug testing should never be undertaken as a standalone response to a drug problem. Other negative effects possibly that this policy could have, there's the possibility, obviously, of false positive results, and that was addressed a minute ago. However, it doesn't take into effect the fact that a student could consume a couple of poppy seed hamburger buns and test positive on a drug test. So there's a lot of things that the student could consume that's not medication that could cause them to test positive. And that's not addressed by this policy. There's also the issue of the student's personal medication, and that could become known to administrators and compromise their privacy. For example, if that student is on antidepressants or other medication, attention deficit, and they feel that they want to keep that private from their teachers or the administrators, it compromises their sense of security and privacy. The disciplinary action that may result from testing positive may disrupt the trajectory of the lives of the students and ultimately cause them more harm than the drug use itself. So in this case, the cure can be worse than the disease, in other words, and that's a concern that I have. There's also the possibility that a positive test result will lead to a depressive episode and possibly suicide. So you have to ask yourself, is the student going to possibly test positive and become depressed and suicidal? So in closing, I would urge you to reconsider this policy or possibly vote it down. I think there's still a lot more work to be done. I wish I had more time. Thank you.
Thank you. You have more? Or?
Sure. Mrs. Perry, would you talk a little bit, go over the medical review process and talk about how that works with families of the students and not the school administration to guard student privacy?
Absolutely. Although not specifically reviewed this evening in policy and certainly in practice, the records would all be protected under HIPAA in terms of medical confidentiality. We would not keep any of this information with the student's academic file. Students who did test positive, those results would not be shared with that campus administration who is the point person, specifically in terms of what. They would receive a notification that there was a medical review flag. That administrator would then contact the family to explain that there appears to be a positive result. Should the family choose to pursue that medical review process, that would happen directly between that medical review officer and the family. The school at no time would have to receive information about any specifics regarding what medication students are taking and for what the positive result was received.
Yes, I appreciate the comments on that. This is something that we've talked about as we've discussed this over the last few months. Some of these studies that were talked about, and I know that in previous board workshops, we've talked about the efficacy of drug testing, and it is not the single standalone method to combat student drug use in the school district. One of the things that improves the efficacy of these programs is the access to community agencies and support within the local community. As a part of this policy, as a part of our practice, we'll be giving resources available for those who should test positive. There's also, as a part of the orientation, we didn't really go go into great depth of that. Part of the orientation will be to educate our students and families about the negative effects of drugs and alcohol. So there will be an education component involved in this as well. And that's a part of the policy that you'll be asked to consider here briefly. We do understand that there is no magic bullet cure-all for anything in public policy or in public education. We do know that folks in our community and folks on our staff believe strongly that we need to give our parents and our kids another opportunity or another way to be able to say no, and another way to be able to be informed about the negative effects of drugs and alcohol. And we believe as an administration that this random student drug testing policy is a positive step forward for the safety and security of our kids. And as such, we do recommend approval. But we would love to answer any more questions you have and any other comments that you would like to provide.
Let's talk a little bit about, I call it the Seinfeld example. Probably dates me. But the poppy seed roll, I mean, I know we've joked about that. Where Elaine ate the poppy seed muffin and then couldn't go on the trip or whatever it was. We talked about that, I recall, and I seem to recall that the testing is a little more sophisticated now, or is that a very real risk that we need to tell our kids don't eat poppy seed rolls too?
Well, certainly, I think there's risks associated with that in terms of a possibility of a false positive. In speaking with the lab, we do feel that those risks are reduced as compared to previous times. However, that's certainly something that we could incorporate into the orientation if we feel like that's important information for students to be aware of. We've not discussed that particular level of detail at this point, but certainly we could absolutely consider that.
Yeah, I think that might be helpful because, I think one of the things in law, what we talk about, see if I get this right, it's better for 10 guilty people to go free than to punish one innocent person. And in this, I would very much hate to see false positives negatively impact the students. And it's not just that student, it's their entire peer group, if they're on an athletic team, the entire team, the coach, and to some extent, community. So I think that kind of thing is important. And the other one I thought of, we talk about illegal. It actually, in certain circumstances, is legal for a student to drink with his parents. Certainly not advocating that, but it is legal in the law. And if they go have Italian food and a glass of wine on Sunday evening, and then there's a test on Monday, I mean, do we have some leeway in the policy to deal with things like that maybe? Would that be part of the appeal process, or is it just, hey, it's on the list, you shouldn't be doing it?
Due process is important, and the appeals process is important. That's why we have identified that here as a part of FNG local. I can't speak to the sensitivity of the alcohol test and how long it takes alcohol to be metabolized and get out of the system, but so I don't know if something consumed on Sunday night would still be in somebody's system on Monday morning when they did a test or not. So, but to answer the question about, are you just out of luck? No, we do have appeals process that are in place as part of the policy.
Okay. Other thoughts, questions?
I have a question. So in the event that this is approved tonight, do we have a way to measure the success or not success of this and then reevaluate and have criteria to look at it maybe next year after 1 year of implementation?
We certainly do, and what those metrics would be. What is success? Is it a number of positive tests, or is it not a number of positive tests? So we'd have to determine what that is. There would probably be a parent and student component to that, but that is something that, yes, we would want to do to make sure this is still something that we want to do going forward.
I think it's important to know. I mean, I did some digging into this, although it's, albeit just back when we were first discussing this. I mean, these are all not new conversations that we're having right now. So I think it's important for the audience to understand that we've been talking about this for a long time in much more detail than you're likely to hear tonight. I think Sherilyn's question goes directly to the efficacy of the research that's been done on this, which is, broadly speaking, what I would consider to be pretty bad research. And not through any fault of the people doing research on it. I think it's just a hard subject, right? I mean, the only way to know whether a drug test reduces the number of kids doing drugs is to test them all as to whether they're doing drugs or not. And to see whether that number goes down. And needless to say, that's not going to happen. So almost all the research that's out there on this basically measures, ask kids, how likely are you to do drugs before the program starts? And then after a year, ask them again, how likely are you to do drugs? And then they don't find a big giant difference between those two things, and they say the drug testing doesn't do anything. I think it's a great thing. I think it's certainly worth noting that we should, assuming we approve this tonight, reassess this after a year and take a look, if not every single year, given that it costs us money as we move forward. But I've not had one person, after talking to a lot of people about this, I've not had one person say, I don't think we should do this. I mean, it has been overwhelming support, and I'm not just necessarily for running towards something that everybody in the community automatically thinks we should do, but this has been pretty well thought out. It was brought to us by athletic directors that we respect in our district, and I just have to believe that if they're coming to us with a request for that there's probably a need for it, and that's what I kind of have to go by. I spend a good amount of time teaching selection and things like that at the employment level, and I'll just say our tests are significantly better at detecting drugs than they were back when Elaine ate her poppy seed bagel. I mean, you'd have to eat a whole lot of poppy seed bagels to end up with a positive test. And by a lot, I mean more than any person would rationally ever eat. But that doesn't mean that the possibility doesn't exist for false positives, but I think it's a much, much smaller percentage than, and by small, I mean really small. That being said, we've discussed the pros and cons of this for an extended period of time now, and I lean down on the side that the positives have the potential to outweigh the negatives, and I think it's going to be important, and I think our speaker raises some really interesting points, points that we've already talked about, but things that were important as we had this conversation to begin with, that we wanted to make sure that we had something on the back end, that what we don't want to do is just tell kids they tested positive and say, sorry, so long, we'll see you again in a month, but to really do our best to help to point them in the right direction. And time will tell on how well we can do that. And I think that's something that we want to pay attention to as well. So.
Thank you. I follow up just a little bit on that and say I do agree that the recognition that there will be some information about community resources available, education, but to me, I think more importantly, a recognition on our campuses that their culture in relation to this issue matters a great deal. Not that they don't now, but the policy will definitely, I think, allow for a little bit of renewed focus on that. And I think the culture and the climate on the campuses and how everyone talks about and deals with the issue can be very beneficial. A second point, and I think you raised it, was that really the genesis of the process came about when two athletic coordinators in whom we all have a lot of trust and respect in what they do, they both came from districts at some point had some variant of this, so they have lived with it. And people who have personal experience with this type of policy and how it can impact students, that carries a lot of weight with me because I don't claim to have any particular knowledge on this subject other than intuition, and I can sit down and look at it and think all the things that could happen or might happen or that I would hope would happen. But that's all speculation. Whereas someone that's actually lived with it and lived with its impact on kids and families and parents and teams, that's much more important to me. And if they're saying this can be a useful tool here in our community, again, that carries a lot of weight with me. And then the last thing is a question just for clarity. We've had this reviewed to make sure we're in compliance with the law.
So all along the way, we've worked very closely with the Texas Association of School Boards, or TASB, and their policy consultant department. We have a representative there that reviews and helps to actually draft the policy, and she's worked very, very closely. And in fact, just as recently as late last week, we made some of those final edits to our draft, and so you all are aware, was very complimentary of the thoughtfulness that has gone into the language of this particular policy.
And TASB, our policy consultant, works closely with TASB's legal policy on all these issues as well. So they leverage those legal services that we that we use the Texas Association of School Boards for, and so they have vetted that as well.
I mean, I think it's important. I think Jeff's first point was a good one. I don't want anybody to get the impression, and I don't think that's out there based, if you've heard our conversations, that we expect this to solve the drug problems in our schools. We do not. We recognize that this is one small part of a much broader push to create a positive atmosphere in the schools so that kids can be engaged. And we recognize that that is what lessens drug use in the schools. And that's basically what the research says as well, right? I mean, it's basically the research says if you're relying solely on a drug testing plan to solve your drug problems, it's not going to work. And I think we all are walking into this eyes wide open in that regard. So.
Looking for action tonight, or?
Yes, sir. We're looking for action, and the administration recommends approval as presented.
Well, I'd like to say one thing, and then I'm going to make a motion. But what I do want to say is that I think where we started with this thing, we were keeping kids out of their activity for 30 calendar days. You know, that's where we kind of initially started. Not that we were going to do that, but that was our first draft, I guess. And so I'm real happy with the fact that we're keeping them out of an activity for 2 weeks and saying, hey, we're serious about this. This isn't the end of the world. This is a consequence, and we want you to straighten up. And so I think this is a very lenient policy, and I don't think it's end of the world type deal for this. I think y'all have done a real good job. And so with that being said, I'd like to make a motion that we approve as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries 6-0.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, item H2, consider approval of Pre-K Head Start Policy Council membership process. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, members of the board. As a part of the work that we do with Head Start and our cooperative agreement with that program, we look at the Head Start Council membership process, and in your role as one of the governance agencies over Head Start. We have a brief presentation for you today, and we'll be asking action this evening related to the Policy Council membership process. So with more information on that is Sharon Jackson, our Director of Early Education Services, and it's up.
There it is. Thank you, Dr. Ely. Mr. Harris and members of the board, tonight is a very cool opportunity for you to practice shared governance. So I want to go through just some of these things, and then we'll ask that you also make an approval for this item as well. So our goals tonight are to provide information for those of you who don't know it. Many of you have served on the Policy Council, and so it's information that you are aware of. As I said, this shared governance piece is an important part of the Head Start experience, and the Policy Council has asked for your support, your assistance in making this decision. So as I said at the end of these few slides, then we'll want what you believe to be the most appropriate way for us to move forward, and to confirm that as we begin with a new Policy Council very shortly. Again, as a reminder, the membership requirements are that Policy Council must be composed of parents and community members. Parents always having the majority, so at least 51% of the membership of Policy Council should be parents of children currently in the program. These parents have to be elected. They can't volunteer solely. They can't be appointed. They have to be elected by the group of parents that they are going to represent. So this occurs in August at each of our campus orientation meetings, when they are given information about Policy Council, when the requirements or the opportunities are expressed to them, and then they have the opportunity then to determine whether or not this would be a fit for their lifestyle, for their family. Policy Council previously was a membership of only 3 years, but in the 2016 rewrite of the program regulations, they moved it to 5 years. So a Policy Council member, regardless of who they are, parent or community member, has the opportunity to serve for 5 years. That can be any 5 years. They do not have to be consecutive years. So that makes a boost for some families that might have a break in the ages of their children, or have other things coming up that made service difficult. So that 5-year piece is an important part. It's not a requirement, but definitely an opportunity. Policy Council is in place until the new Policy Council is elected. So as that election happens in August, then in September we will have a meeting where both Policy Councils will come together. Some people will be maintaining their role on the council, but others will be moving on. So at that time, then the new Policy Council takes over. Finally, attendance is really important. We have to vote on a number of things that are important pieces of the program. We need to have a quorum to vote. So attendance is expected, and it states in the bylaws, which I believe you were given a copy of digitally earlier, that 2 absences are grounds for replacement. Sometimes families think something's going to work out, and after a month or 2, it doesn't. So without any consequence or negative feelings, sometimes families just need to be replaced. So those are the requirement pieces. This is the current practice. As you see, we have 3 different groups there. First of all, the classroom-based option, and that's what I mentioned earlier, that it happens at the August orientations. Typically, we have been in the past requesting 1 representative from each classroom. So as there are different numbers of classrooms at campuses, that sometimes makes one campus have more representation than another. You see the home visiting option there. That's for our 0 to 3-year-old families. And they meet at least twice a month in a socialization experience at the Barbara Bush Parent Center. And during part of that time, they talk about Policy Council opportunities, help the parents understand the responsibilities associated with it, and then select 6 representatives. The numbers 6 and 12 are simply representative of the children that are enrolled in the 2 programs. Finally, we have the community representatives who serve after they have been selected. The selection is specifically different from the election of the parents that are of parents of children currently in the program. But community representatives can also be parents of children no longer in the program. They change their role in that way. So the first meeting is a discussion of people that we may have connections to. If somebody lives next door to a firefighter, or someone has taken their children to a doctor that has expressed interest, those kinds of things are determined, and any kind of connections that are there or interests that sometimes the families have. And then those assignments are made of the current policy council to go out and talk to the people and see if they're interested, and to gain community representatives in that way. We always like to talk about celebrations first. So when we think about Policy Council, some of the things that work really well with it are that the location, the Barbara Bush Parent Center, is very convenient, has a place where children can be cared for. It has a kitchen so that we can provide a meal for families. The whole process works very well at that location. The election process tends to work very well during the socializations and orientation meetings. We do not leave the meetings typically without filling those slots that are available for families. Currently, our leadership is very experienced. We have a chairperson and co-chairperson who are both experienced in being on Policy Council. They're active in the community, and so the leadership at this time is good, and that's part of where this request from the Policy Council came for you. Finally, our community representatives are some of our most active participants. They come regularly to the meetings, they provide their insight and input into decision-making, and are really a valuable part of the governance that's done by Policy Council. We have a couple of concerns, and as I said, this is where Policy Council was requesting your help. We have heard from other programs and even from one consultant that our Policy Council is quite large compared to others across the nation. So when we think about having 12 plus 6 plus some more, how many ever that is for community reps, then you're getting generally over 20. So is that too large to be efficient? A question that we would just have to kind of talk about. Representation from bilingual classes is different, and that was really the main thing that Policy Council saw as a concern. We have often, because we have 3 of our Head Start classrooms are bilingual or completely done, furnished in Spanish, so the parents of those children may want to participate, but language is sometimes a difficulty for that. As we think about the representation from bilingual classes, and those, do we want to make that an even English and Spanish? How do we want to go forward with that? So there are a couple of different things that were suggested and questioned with the previous Policy Council. And then, just to be realistic, we have a commitment issue sometimes. As I said, we need a quorum. It's difficult to maintain. With the number, our quorum last year was 11, so we had to have 11 people there, which is one over half. So that's an issue too, that whether or not size would affect that, I don't know the answer, but that's just a concern that was expressed by the Policy Council as they requested your support. So finally, as we look at the decision here that needs to be made, and the decision is simply because the Board of Trustees approves the Policy Council selection process, which is where this is coming from. So the options that I saw were to keep the membership process the same as we saw it on the previous slide, to change the process with some kind of specific recommendation from your expertise, or to simply table it, put it on hold, and wait and have a more long-standing conversation with the new Policy Council. So with that, Dr. Ely, Mr. Harris, I will turn it to you then, and for whatever kind of discussion you would like to have, or I'm happy to answer questions.
So what is your recommendation?
My recommendation is to discuss it with the new policy council and provide them the opportunity to work with the board hand in hand.
So that recommendation, does that need a vote to be able to do that?
It needs a vote,
Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, based on some of those suggestions, that would be my gut reaction. Ask the new policy council how they would like to see the process change. If they want to cut back numbers, okay. I think that's fine, but where do you cut back? And you still have to be in compliance with the 51% rule. But that's just my kind of gut reaction to it is, yeah, let's see what they want out of the policy council. And I think we're probably happy to entertain those suggestions. Any other thoughts, questions?
I have one question. Were you looking for the board to give you some expertise before or after? That's what I didn't understand. Would you prefer it after, or were you looking for some kind of?
We simply have to make a decision on what you want to do as the shared governance piece. So if everybody's under has the same opinion that you want to sit with the policy council and come to a decision, then we'll just approve that and then move forward.
Okay, so as I understand it, do we need to approve the existing policy subject to recommendation from the new policy council? Is that?
This is the process to gain new policy council members. So what we need to approve is that you approve the idea of waiting and discussing it with the new council.
Okay. I think I understand. So we're looking for a motion to approve the membership process and make a request, maybe with that motion, that the new policy council provide recommendations on how to improve that process, if any. They
With
may-
input from the board.
Well,
I mean,
I'm sorry, I'm
other-
making it difficult.
Oh, no.
What-
I think I understand what you're asking. Well, I think I understand most of it, but when you say input from the board, are you saying to get the group together and then all of us, because I mean, that would have to be in open meetings and.
Right,
I mean,
it
we
doesn't
could-
have to be all of
It
you.
would have to be a
Just-
representative?
Right, just a representative.
Like say Mr.
or-
Schaefer, since he's not here
Right.
tonight?
Right,
That's what you get for
He's
not
on that
coming,
committee, I
right?
think, isn't he?
He is on that.
Or you are? No, it's
Okay.
Geraldine is.
Ms. Nolan.
Yeah. So I think that would be fine.
Okay.
They just need some interaction with this body because it's a shared governance process.
And we can just do that with Miss Nolan. And so it's just Miss Nolan that you're really.
So it would be a revision to the bylaws for the following year, correct? Because if you're already going to be.
For the 18-19 year.
The 18-19 year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
it seems to me that 18, 19 years starting in a month, right?
Right.
Yes.
It does, but
Right.
policy council doesn't start until September.
Okay. I mean, I'm more than willing to meet with you guys at some point in between now and then, along with Ms. Nolan, but maybe it might behoove us to approve the procedures for the next year as they currently stand, and then for us to play a larger role as they might want to change that coming up for the next
That's
year.
an excellent suggestion as well.
So I would move that we approve the procedures for the Head Start Policy Council composition for the 2018-19 school year, with the understanding that several board members will meet with that policy council over this coming year to take a new look at their selection procedures.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye?
Aye. All opposed? Motion carries 6-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Jackson.
Takes us to item I1, consider approval of new administrator contracts as recommended by the superintendent of schools. Dr. Ely.
Mr. Harris, members of the board, we've had the opportunity to make some changes to our senior leadership team here in the central office and have two positions that I'm happy to make a recommendation for you this evening. The first is for the Director of Special Services. With Mrs. Perry moving into her role as Chief Administrative Officer, we have the opportunity to backfill with the Director of Special Services. You've already heard from my recommendation this evening with Mrs. Lindsay Fuentes. Lindsay joined us 2 years ago. And she served as one of our two assistant directors of special services. Before that, she served in Irving ISD for 4 years as a coordinator of special services. She's also worked in special education in a number of great districts as a diagnostician at DeSoto ISD. She's been in Waco Midway and Dallas ISD as well. She has come to us and done very well. She's earned the respect of the special education teachers and staff. They find her to be hardworking and a problem solver who always has the student's best interest in mind. And so I'm excited to recommend Lindsay for the position of Director of Special Services. Also, I would like to recommend Mr. Jeff Mann, formerly the principal of A&M Consolidated Middle School, for the position of Director for Instruction and Leadership Development. Mr. Mann has been with our district for a number of years, starting as a head athletic trainer at A&M Consolidated High School. He's been also an assistant principal at Consol, and for the last 5 years has been a principal at Oakwood and then at A&M Consolidated Middle School. Jeff is constantly pushing his students, his staff, his administrative team, and himself to be better and to try new things, to be innovative and creative. Jeff's approach to leadership and professional development will be great for us at the district level. So it's my privilege to recommend Mr. Jeff Mann to be the new Director of Instruction and Leadership Development. So with those recommendations, it's to you, Mr. Harris.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Or I'm excited about your recommendations personally, so.
I am too.
I would just say the only real downside about putting those people in these jobs will be that they're no longer in their old jobs that they were doing a really good job with. I'm sure we can find great people to replace them, but we'll miss both of them in those spots where they've done an outstanding job.
That's right.
I'll move to approve the new administrative contracts as recommended.
Second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? No. Motion carries 6-0. Congratulations. Let's see. Takes us to item K1. Receive report regarding school safety adjustments for 2018-19. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, members of the board. I just like to talk a little bit about school safety, and Mr. Martindale, our Deputy Superintendent, Chief Financial Officer, will give us a presentation about some of the proposed changes that we have for 2018-19. But before we get into that, I just want to talk a little bit about school safety. It's been on the forefront of everybody's mind. It is every year, but 2017-18 was an especially sobering year in public education when you think of what happened in Parkland, Florida, and closer to us in Santa Fe, Texas. I want people in the community to know that we don't just think about school safety when we have a tragedy in our state or elsewhere, but we think about this on a daily basis. We have a district-wide safety team that meets regularly to discuss the latest happenings in school safety and learnings that we can implement in College Station ISD. Each of our campuses has a campus safety team that meets regularly on talking about specific issues on their particular campus. But that being said, with what happened in February in Florida and what happened in May in Santa Fe, we've continued to bring these groups back together and discuss in even more detail what possible changes we could make moving forward, and we're happy to report some of those changes to the community this evening. Want to make special note of Mr. John Hall, who's our Executive Director for Facilities. John is not here today, he's on vacation. But John has done a yeoman's work in this area. John's leadership in school safety, his background as an officer in the Air Force, and his experience both working for Texas A&M and for us makes him a great leader for us in making sure that we continue to keep our schools and our buildings and our faculty and students safe on a daily basis. He's worked tirelessly with members of the community, members of local law enforcement, to look at our plans, to listen to ideas, to vet those, and to organize our district safety team and work through a lot of suggestions that we've had both from best practice and from the community. I would be remiss if I didn't also recognize Lieutenant Sean McCarroll, who's with us today with the Brazos County Sheriff's Office, and thank you for their great partnership and the work that we get to do on a daily basis with the Sheriff's Office and their intimate involvement with both our district safety plans and some of the recommendations that we have before you or this evening. So I guess I'd just say this is something that's on our mind all the time, even more so when we see things happen. And we're very fortunate to have great community partners in this community to help us with this. So with that as a backdrop, what I'd like for Mr. Martindale to do is kind of talk about some of the things that we've landed on. This will not be the end of the conversation, but this is where we are right now with some of the things that we want to do on a number of different areas that impact school safety, from mental health to cooperation with local law enforcement, to hardening of targets, to planning and drilling and all those types of things. So with that as a backdrop, Mr. Martindale, Deputy Superintendent and Chief Financial Officer, would you kind of take us through the 2018-19 school safety recommendations?
Absolutely, Dr. Ely. And again, I want to reiterate, Mr. Hall is somewhere in Europe right now. So I'm sure he's enjoying his trip overseas. Yeah, that's true. It would be the middle of the, but maybe not. Who knows? And again, to touch base on some of the things that Dr. Ely mentioned, I'll touch on a number of efforts identified for the upcoming school year to enhance already what's in place with regards to school safety here in College Station ISD. Obviously, this is not an all-inclusive report, but just to highlight some of the items that have been identified and the efforts in place as we move forward and plan for the upcoming school year. And again, as he mentioned, this is a continuous process. So the conversation doesn't end with this, but it's an ongoing evaluation of practice to reflect and improve. So with that being said, I'm going to touch on or speak on several different topics along the lines of school safety. The first being school resource deputy and the staffing adjustments we've made for the upcoming school year. Some personnel training that our folks will be going through at the campus level, as well as professional development opportunities. Campus drills and safety audits, some of the adjustments we've made to the number of drills we're going to require here locally, as well as our practice with safety audits. Law enforcement presence, some of the efforts that will be in place to increase law enforcement presence throughout the district at our facilities and on campus. Facility adjustments, some plans as far as the installation of magnetic locks at our campuses. And again, I'll touch on that in more detail briefly. And the implementation of the P3 Act, which will allow us enhanced anonymous reporting or tips from a student's perspective. I'll begin with the student resource staffing. You're probably most familiar with this because it's been a significant conversation as far as our budgeting conversations the last several months. Going into the 18-19 school year, we'll have 6 school resource deputies. Of course, they'll be assigned to each of our middle school and high school campuses. The addition of Welborn and a school resource deputy to cover that campus. So obviously that's a +1 with opening of that new campus. We've also built into the budget school resource deputy, which we've termed a rover position. So it won't be assigned specifically to a campus, but it allows us a person to fill in case one of the other SRDs are occupied or absent or occupied with transporting from a campus. So it gives us that additional position so that we're not left exposed to a particular campus where one of our 6 are assigned to. It also gives us a person that can serve as a presence at our K through 6 campuses on a random basis. So that increased staffing will definitely serve us as far as taking care of our secondaries and also providing the resource to increase our presence at the K through 6 campuses throughout the district. Personnel training, Mr. McCarroll and the Brazos County Sheriff's Office is going to assist us and provide training with standard response protocol. They'll be doing that with all of our campuses throughout the course of this next year. That basically educates us on their standard response as far as emergency response folks, and also allows us to link up our terminology we use on campus and with the law enforcement. Also, as a part of that will be the CRAES, or Civilian Response to Active Shooter events training that they'll also provide as a piece of this. Very similar to what we have in practice now. However, the CRAES process adds the defend component. So they'll be reviewing and training our folks in that. Mr. Glenn Winkle and his office is in the process of completing a video that summarizes and captures the CRAES process, and that will be shared out on our campuses throughout the course of the first couple of weeks of school to kind of share with our students and educate them in this process on how to respond. Additional training opportunities, behavior threat assessment training, that is provided by the Texas School Safety Center. That will be occurring in Houston actually this Friday. There'll be several of us attending that and gathering that information, bringing it back for reflection here in the district. This is one recommended by Governor Abbott in his school safety report. Also, a number of professional development opportunities here in the district. Mental health first aid training provided by our friends at National Alliance on Mental Illness. These are opportunities provided here in the school district. We've had one of those trainings already. The second's coming on the 26th, and I believe Ms. Hester let me know there would be a third opportunity also. And this is just a professional development opportunity that our faculty and staff can sign up for and be a part of. Campus drills and safety, some of the adjustments we're making here is we're increasing the number of intruder and active shooter drills. In the past, we've had 1 required per semester at the campus level. We're increasing that to 2. As well, as far as safety audits, those in the past have occurred every 3 years. We're going to, in essence, kind of put it on a third of our facilities or campuses every year so that we're receiving feedback from those safety audits on some of our facilities annually as opposed to every 3 years. So we think receiving some of that feedback on an annual basis allows to reflect what's occurring there, wherever the audit occurred, but how can we apply it throughout as well. Increased law enforcement presence. Been working, Dr. Ely's been working with Chief McCullum. For example, when we have CSPD patrol officers out on beat, there are times where they need to stop, complete paperwork and those types of things. They typically do those in their vehicles, and the arrangement or the practice is going to be that they utilize our parking lots and our facilities when they park and take care of those. It just allows an additional presence while they take care of some of those different activities they would have during the course of the day. Presence at school-wide events. This is captured at many of our secondaries because of having an SRD assigned there. But for example, when we have larger school-wide events at the elementaries, maybe a sing-along or awards night where there are a large number of people present, that the practice will be in place that we have a law enforcement representative, whether it's CSPD or a sheriff's officer, whatever it may be, present at those particular activities. Mr. Hall has also worked very closely with the police department in making sure that they have the most current facility layouts and maps and door numberings for each of our facilities in the school district. And also, and he mentioned this to me as well, that they have already, on a number of occasions, met some patrol officers and walked through different facilities during the course of the day so that we make sure that they're familiar with our facilities in case they have to ever respond. Also, the Sheriff's Office will, in the upcoming school year, Brazos County Sheriff's Office will have access to our campus camera systems. So they'll be able to log in and view what's occurring at the campuses, various campuses we have through our camera systems. They had not had that access previously. We have that arrangement and it works preparation for next year. So it just gives them a live look at the same thing that we're seeing. Facility adjustments. We've moved forward with the ordering of and the installation process will begin soon, placing magnetic door locks in our offices at all campuses. And kind of if I can describe the setting for you, when you go in, you check in at a campus with the front receptionist, and they clear you and print your visitor's tag. At that point, that person there in the office would have to release the magnetic door lock from the office that allows the visitor into the main part of the building. So it provides one more safety measure as far as entrance into the building itself. Our student resource deputies will have gun cabinets installed in their offices for this next school year. This allows them the ability to secure and store their long rifles there in their office as opposed to current practice where they're storing those in their vehicles. So it just provides them as far as having them there with them in case there is an emergency as opposed to having to respond and go out to a vehicle and come back. Enhanced anonymous reporting. Currently we have the Quick Tip, which is web-based and folks, kiddos or whomever can provide anonymous tips through that system, through our website, campus website, district website. What we will be implementing with Brazos County Sheriff's Office next year is the P3 app. It's an app for phones, and kiddos can download that, provide tips through that app. What really makes this a very nice resource is it allows for two-way communication. The Quick Tip is a report, and you really can't follow up or communicate back with the person providing the tip. In the P3 app, it will allow for the officer that receives the tip to reply back or ask questions and provides the tipsters them the opportunity to have dialogue while remaining anonymous at the same time. So I think that'll be a tremendous resource for us also. Just touched on a couple of things, obviously not all inclusive. As I mentioned before, process, this is an ongoing. Safety is always fluid. You're always looking for best practice, reflecting on current practice. But we thought it was important just to touch base with the board, provide you just a summary of some of the efforts in place to enhance current practice as we move into the next school year. And I'd be happy to field any questions.
Thank you. Any questions at this point, comments? I know you've all heard some of this before. Well, I really want to express my thanks, and I'll give it to you since Mr. Hall's not here. So thank you for that. I know how much work has gone into coming up with this list of things that we'll be tackling in the short term, but I also know that it will be an ongoing process for you all as you continually evaluate and push and pull on that to make sure that our students are as safe as they can reasonably be. Is that it?
Well, I was waiting to see if you're taking a breath.
No, I'm looking around, seeing if anybody else has anything.
We have spent a lot of time on this particular issue, and as well as behind closed doors, just because of the nature of what we're discussing. But as a representative of the community, the time spent and the thoughtfulness spent on all of this is really phenomenal. And the parents need to know that everyone, not just the people that we've called out tonight, but the administrators, campus administrators, and teachers are all very heavily involved in trying to make certain that our students are safe. They talk a lot about it. They think a lot about it. I don't know that there are many of you that go home and don't at some point, especially after something happens, think and rethink. And, you know, one of the things that I really remember Dr. Ely saying as he became superintendent and he was taking a walk is that that the student safety so relied on him. And, you know, that right there tells me that it starts from the top and that just goes through the entire district. We have a lot of students that have shown concern in this past 6 months, have called some of us and talked to us about their safety as well. So it's on the forefront of everyone's mind. And because of that, I think as we all work together, the community, the students, the administration, the teachers, you know, I think that we can not guarantee there's no guarantee ever with any kind of safety. We just have done so many things to make that safety possible. And when you look back, even when most of us went to school, the thought of even discussing some of these things would not have even, we would have had parents come and knocking us down saying, please do not discuss this with our kids. And yet now we're having to discuss this with, you know, kindergartners coming to school. So it really is hard, but know that I think all precautions that we can do at this time that are reasonable are taking place. And, you know, I know that there's going to be some changes for parents as we have this magnetic door on there, and everybody needs to be patient as we try to keep your children safe, because I think we're all used to doing certain things that we may not be able to do anymore, and that the community also needs to recognize that we have to be patient with the administrators as well as they try to implement these things. And I also want to say thank you to the Sheriff's Department and CSPD, because without them, you know, their presence, I think we wouldn't feel as safe as we do because they're here and working together with us, and I appreciate them very much.
Done. Okay. Anybody else?
Report only, no action.
Okay. So that takes us to L1, where the board will meet in executive session to discuss superintendent contract. The executive session deliberations will be held pursuant to the Personnel Matters Closed Meeting exception to the Texas Open Meeting Act as set forth in Section 551.074 of the Texas Government Code. If we were to take any action, we would return to open session to do it, but please note that that is not anticipated. In fact, we worded the agenda item such that it's not included. So we don't anticipate any further action in open session tonight. But with that, we will convene to executive session. We're adjourned.